We are back at One Market in San Francisco in just about 24 hours, not too far from here. Apple is expected to unveil 3 new iPhones, the event coming as the stock has sputtered. We're joined now by angel investor Jason Calacanis, along with the investor Dan Niles. Dick Costolo, of course, is still with us. And the big news, Dan, nice to see you. Jason, good to see you as well. Thanks for being here. Is the move you made in the stock just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it that big a move, but we were along the stock.
You're short Apple.
Well, yeah, but this is the way I look at it. The stock's up over 35% for the year, but look at the financials. The revenues are up 1%. The earnings are down 5%. And these new phones, the big innovation is we might get a purple and green color. Wow, that's exciting. And there's no 5G on the phone. You know, you're going to get a better camera, but the cameras we currently have are pretty good, and maybe you can charge some other products. So for us, it's a small position. You have to remember, we're actually very long the supply chain for Apple, where you've had Apple burn a lot of inventory over the past 6 months. So one of our largest positions is a company called Lumentum. They provide the lasers for Apple, and that stock's trading at about 12.5 times earnings, and we think that's a huge runway for them, regardless of Apple.
So what turns you more bullish on the story then?
I mean, quite honestly, you know, if you look at the big trends in tech right now, what do you have? Well, you've got 4.5 billion people on the planet out of the 7.5 billion people who already have cell phones. The improvements you're getting are very incremental. And last year you had smartphone unit sales decline for the first time since the iPhone was launched. So you're talking about a very slow growth market for a product that's over 50% of their revenues, and they're at the high end of the market. So until they get a 5G phone out, and that's going to probably come next year, it's hard for me to see somebody running out and spending $1,000 so they can buy a purple phone and with a better camera. So for me, Apple, it's had a great run, great buyback, obviously, great dividend, but you know, the big moves we made last week, quite honestly, is we shorted the bonds, and we bought Silicon Valley Bank, which is down 39% year to date. We bought Lincoln Financial with a 6 PE that's down 23% or so year to date, and we think the financials actually, and that trades at a 6 PE. We think those are some of the more interesting spaces of the market where these stocks have gotten absolutely killed, and if we're not going into a recession, you're going to have a big bounce in the financials, and so those were the big moves we actually made last week.
What, Jason, does Apple need to do, in your estimation, to get an investor like Dan Niles more excited about the story?
Yeah, you got to fire Tim Cook. It's a disaster. I mean, I think they haven't done anything innovative since this device, which is magical. The iPods are
I thought
amazing.
You were joking. You're being
No, I'm being
serious?
dead serious. I think it's time for him to pass the baton because listen, Steve Jobs passed away. The phone has been in decline since. There's no reason to upgrade your phone. So peak phone was, what, 2015? And it prints money, sure, but the major problem is they believe that any company that innovates out there is not as good as theirs. They need to watch what Zuckerberg did with Instagram and WhatsApp and what Google did with Android and with Instagram. Dan's going to buy back into the stock if they buy Tesla, if they buy Peloton, if they buy Spotify, and they start putting that $200 billion to work. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Well, I mean,
if they had that, I mean, if they put Peloton in every store, would you buy?
I'm not I like my Stairmaster.
The broader
anyway.
point that Jason's making.
But the point he's making actually has a lot of validity to it, in the sense that if you think, the one thing I will say Tim Cook has done better than any CEO is deal with the current administration. And so he's put his personal feelings aside, obviously openly gay man, highest profile CEO on Wall Street, and he's done a great job dealing with the Trump administration. So more than any other CEO, you have to give him a lot of credit for that. Now, on the innovation front, I completely agree with them. It's something I've said before. Apple, since the passing of Steve Jobs, but to be fair, he's a once-in-a-generation, maybe somebody like an Elon Musk that you're going to see.
What's the stock really up? Isn't the stock up 250%? Yeah, or I forgot what the number is. Well, that number may be wrong. My point is, though, the stock is up a lot.
That's because they're extracting so much money from their loyal fans. The margin on this is $150.
And don't forget, they have a huge buyback. They have a massive dividend. And so that's great that the stock does really well right now. But if you're looking out for this company over the next 2, 3, 5 years, once that buyback starts to peter out and that balance sheet starts to wind down, they're not innovating that much. They're 1 year behind Samsung on 5G. When you're trying to have somebody cough up $1,000 for a new phone, I think that's a big deal. So you know, I think the stock's going to actually do relatively well between now and when they have to report the fourth quarter. If you think of last year, right, stock did great for the first 9 months. Then they had to sell 50% more phones in the fourth quarter. And I was on your show in August saying, I think Apple's going to have a huge problem because people are worried about China, yet they're somehow not worried about Apple that's got high teens percentage of revenue.
$20 off the high.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with what Jason's talking about in terms of innovation,
What got you here will not get you there.
Yeah,
and that's their core problem. They are resting on the laurels of Steve Jobs' legacy. They need to put Tim Cook in another position, get Elon Musk in there, let him run the company. Find somebody like that, somebody who is maniacal about product. I mean, let's just sit here and realize that iPods are the greatest headphones ever made, and that's the greatest thing they've done over there in 10 years. It's a disaster. And if they take that store footprint and they put a Model 3 in every one, if they put a Peloton tread in there, and I've been using the tread, it is exceptional. Peloton is the Tesla or the iPhone of sports equipment. It would go gangbusters. They would go from 500,000 Peloton subscribers to at least 10 million. That's the type of acquisition you need to make if you're going to compete. And they just have way too much pride. They think that they make the best products in the world and nobody else can. Incorrect. Tesla, Peloton, Facebook, Google, all making wonderful products right now. The Pixel 3 with Google Fi is a better experience than the iPhone. I have both. I use both. I've used every version of both phones. The Google Pixel is a better phone.
Talk about I mean, do you agree? You agree with this, or you disagree?
I just think there's a huge opportunity around Apple TV and combining what they've built there with a streaming service that would give them an enormous competitive advantage over the other players in the streaming space. Well, and I just is it coming? Well, is it coming next? Is it coming in the next couple of weeks?
This is what I would say with regards to that. I think Apple TV is going to be a humongous disappointment, and this is why. Why do you get a TV service? It's for content. Now, there's
you were asking me that as a question.
Yeah.
I was stumbling there for a while.
Why do you use the television?
Now here's the thing, right?
Niles answered his own.
Yeah, exactly. But there's this little company called Disney that's coming out, and they plan on bundling Disney along with ESPN, along with Hulu for $12.99 a month.
Game over.
They are going to absolutely crush everybody else who's trying to launch a streaming service, including the incumbent Netflix. If you're them, you've got a rather big problem on your hands.
Well, their stock has shown that.
And, well, the funny thing is Netflix's subscribers in the U.S. declined sequentially for the first time in a decade. That's without having Disney in there pushing their content. So you look at Apple and you go, well, where's the big store of content that they're going to have? Now, the good news is they have an installed base of 900 million iPhones. They have 1.4 billion devices. There's going to be some set of people that do say, okay, I'm going to buy that.
I haven't heard anybody on this desk talk about the services business.
Yeah, but the reason is the services business is 10%
in and of itself.
The services business is 10% of revenues. Yeah. iPhones is 50% of revenues. There's a reason why revenues are up 1% year over year and earnings are down 5%. It's great to say, well, don't look at this. Go look at that 10% piece. Well, yeah, but that 10% piece isn't big enough to move the needle. Now, wearables is, I think, 19% or so of revenues. That's growing very rapidly. But again, you have to look at this in total. Yeah, the stock's done well, but it's not what it's doing to this point. You're looking at this and going, all right, there's a big gaping hole between now and this time next year when they have a 5G phone. I'm looking at a company like Activision, which is changing gears. You're going to see Microsoft, Amazon, Google all launch game streaming services. And if you look at a tweet I put out last week, I've got 2 nerds living in my basement. My wife prefers to call them children. But, you know, they were all geeked up about the new launch of World of Warcraft coming, right? And we're in Hawaii surfing, and they're like busy making names for the World of Warcraft launch, right? That's gone from 12 million subs to less than 3. And this whole free-to-play genre, everybody's heard of Fortnite, PUBG, that started in the beginning of 2017. That's crushed that whole sector. I mean, Activision's down 34% from its 52-week high. Now, what happens with streaming, though, is you go from being able to play games on your console. There are only about 50 million Xboxes, PlayStations, etc. sold last year, to all of a sudden, if you can play that on the 1.5 billion smartphones sold every year, that becomes much more interesting. And Call of Duty, which is the big Activision game, that's expected to be able to be played on mobile coming up soon. So Those are things that are interesting. There's a lot of content from those games.
Yeah, I just think Apple TV will not exist in 5 to 10 years. Not the hardware part, but the subscription. They'll cancel that service. They have no business being in that. They're horrible at content. And their whole concept of, like, not doing edgy content in the age of Succession and HBO battling it out with Netflix to see who could be more edgy, and AMC. It's just a disaster. They need to really rethink everything. But the subscription revenue, we're seeing many startups in Silicon Valley. Calm.com is one of the ones I invested in. We own 5% of that company. They're going to do $160 million in subscriptions this year, and they fork over 15 to 30% of that to Apple. That is a very real business. It may be a slow burn, but it is the future of consumption. People don't have to make a cognitive decision to buy a product. They can just subscribe and cancel at any time. That leads to a lot of sampling, and it's going to be a ginormous business.
I mean, quite honestly, if Apple bought a content maker, like, I mean, if you think about the streaming services coming, you've got Disney, obviously the juggernaut in the space. But Comcast is coming as well. They own NBC Universal, right? Obviously a lot of content there. And then you have AT&T launching their own streaming service. They own Warner, which obviously Harry Potter, etc. And so you look at all of this and you say, well, what's the big content that Apple owns?
No idea.
And you go, well, if they bought some of these media companies that are now trading at like 6 times, earnings, which given Apple's trading at about 17 times, you go, okay, at least you could make the argument, we've got some interesting content that people might want to watch. Right now they're doing one-off deals with some, people like Oprah and Steven Spielberg.
And this goes back to the first point about them having no audacious nature in them to buy things. Iger was like, you know what? Pixar, Marvel, I'll take it all. Star Wars, I'll take everything. They don't have to, they don't sit in there going, oh, you know what, Star Wars, we didn't make Star Wars. Oh, we didn't create the Marvel Universe, therefore we can't buy it.
That's why we own Disney. We love that. They're going to be the winner in streaming.
They have $200 billion. What are they doing with it? They bought Beats for $2 billion. I mean, Zuckerberg paid $19 billion for WhatsApp. That was, I think, 20% of the company at the time, or 15% of the company. Can you imagine Apple making a bet like that? Of course not. That's why you have to take the guy in the seat who's been a great steward for 10 years and move him out. And put somebody in there who has the guts to buy something.
Provocative thoughts, as always. I would expect nothing less from Jason Calacanis. He's going to stick with us. Dan, thank you for being here. Great to get your insights on all things tech. Costolo is going to stick around as well. Coming up, big tech under fire. U.S. states taking aim at Google. An antitrust announcement expected in a matter of hours. How the Valley is preparing for regulation. Halftime report back right after this. About 90 minutes from now, about 30 attorneys general are expected to announce an antitrust investigation into Google. Our Ilan Moy joins us from the steps of the Supreme Court, where that announcement will be made. Ilan.
That's right, Scott. We're expecting this announcement to come at 2 p.m. right here in front of the Supreme Court, and have now been able to confirm that nearly every single state in the country will be participating in this antitrust investigation against Google. The one notable exception is California, Scott, where you are, and of course, home to Google's headquarters. Now, that's according to a source familiar with the case. The California State AG's office has sent me a statement that says the state remains deeply concerned and committed to fighting anti-competitive behavior. Now, the state that is leading this case is Texas. The Attorney General there is Ken Paxton. He's a Republican, and he's indicated that this case will center on 3 big questions. 1, is Google stifling competition? 2, is it restricting access? And 3, is it harming consumers? I'm also told that the investigation will include a demand that Google turn over documents related to its advertising business. Now, for its part, Google has already released a statement preemptively saying that its services help people create more choice and support thousands of jobs. So clearly, Scott, this is not Google's first rodeo. Fortunately or unfortunately for the company, they've grown well accustomed to these types of investigations, both here at home and abroad. Back over to you.
Yeah, Ilan, thanks so much. That's Ilan Moy outside the Supreme Court for us. Okay, the gang's all back. Jeff Richards is back from GGV. Your industry's under fire. I don't know how else to say it. What are you all thinking about it? Jeff, you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that Ilan made about, is it better for consumers? I mean, there's no question our lives are better because of Amazon, because of Google, perhaps because of Facebook. The question that I think comes back to is, are we stifling competition? And that's where it gets challenging. You have 90% search share. You have a dominant position in maps. you own a lot of the advertising infrastructure in the United States. So it's a fair question, but I personally feel like my life's better because of Google. So it's hard to then wind back the clock and ask about those other factors.
I feel like the regulators always, fight the last war. I'm not saying anything. I don't think I'm saying anything original here, but they went after Microsoft when Microsoft, at least for those of us out here, felt like much less of a threat. They're going after Google now when there are plenty of other areas of tech that feel like they're monopolies. Certainly Facebook owns the social graph and decides who can and can't have access to that via their APIs, et cetera. The App Store is, as Jason mentioned earlier in the show, you got to pay the VIG. You got to pay the 30% on any subscription that goes through there. If there was a competitive App Store, the App Store wouldn't be able to charge 30% on subscriptions. So I just kind of feel like the regulators once again are going after yesterday's issues, and there are bigger issues facing the competitive landscape.
You're not being dismissive, though, about some of the self-inflicted issues that need to be dealt with one way or the other, are you?
100%. So many of these things are own goals. There was an advertising issue raised the other week by the folks running the new Brave browser about hidden pages that Google Ads was surfacing to making sure data was passed between advertising partners. Those things are own goals and self-inflicted wounds that the folks out here just have to get smarter about.
The one thing I'll add, and then I know you're going to jump in with something aggressive, but the
my reputation precedes me.
Yeah, exactly. But think about where Google, Amazon, Facebook are dominant, particularly Google and Amazon, is in the U.S. 300 million people in the U.S. There's 7.3 billion people in the world. What happens as the next billion come online in Latin America, Southeast Asia, India, Africa? Do we want Google going after those consumers, or do we want to hand the keys to those markets to other tech companies around the world? I think that's got to be part of the equation as well. It's not just about the U.S. as we have a global market now.
Yeah, I just think historically you would buy on an antitrust investigation because it means the company is truly meaningful, and there's no way anybody in our government can take these success stories and ankle them in the face of China picking the winners, right? I mean, we have TikTok, the first Chinese company that has hit any type of scale in America on our shores. Why we allow them in our country when Twitter is not allowed in China is beyond comprehension for me, and you can be sure the Chinese government has access to those microphones and cameras of tens of millions of Americans using TikTok. Putting that aside, I think there's one of two outcomes here. One, they put Google in the penalty box, and maybe it impacts revenue in the low single digits. And the way that would happen is because Google has been so aggressive in pushing down the organic search results and putting their own services above it, and they put 5 or 6 links up there that you can't tell are ads. So if the antitrust people would like a place to look, put 100 consumers in front of a Google search and say, tell me what's ads and what's not, and 60 or 70% of them will not know the difference, and that's where they could really hurt Google, 5 to 10%. The master play for Google is to say, you know what, you got us. We're going to spin out YouTube. We're going to spin out Nest. And that will create more shareholder value, because those assets unleashed outside of Alphabet would do even better, which is why they set up Alphabet to begin with. Alphabet being set up as a way to distance Larry, who does not want to speak in public. When's the last time you had Larry on the show? Oh, never. He doesn't talk publicly. He is not available. Something's wrong with his throat. He does have a thing, but he is not available to talk about it. They've been very smart about architecting this company so nobody's in charge and nobody knows where the bodies are buried.
Let me ask you about Facebook. Costolo says monopoly on the social network. Jeff enlisting, my life is better off with Google. He used the word perhaps when talking about Facebook. How do you see Facebook?
Well, Facebook is really the cause of all this. They were the first company here in Silicon Valley to really abuse the customer base at an audacious level. And then they did something that was really distasteful here. They treated other entrepreneurs like the Chinese companies and entrepreneurs treat America. In other words, they had no respect for intellectual property. And that has made them so loathsome and hated here in the community by taking everything that Evan Spiegel did with Snapchat and just stealing it like a photocopy. And they put the target on their back. And then for Zuckerberg to come out and say, like, oh, it's ridiculous that an election could be swung by our services, while the sales team is embedded in Trump and Hillary and everybody else's campaign with sales documents saying, we'll help you win your election. And then Zuckerberg says it's not possible. It's that kind of arrogance that Zuckerberg has that has led to the government having to do something. Now, what can they do? Can they get them to break up and sell Instagram or WhatsApp? I don't think so, but they're not going to let them buy the next ones. And that's really, I think, the existential risk for Zuckerberg is he has been such a bad steward of that company. He has been such a bad human being in how he's treated his own users that he needs to be stopped. And if we didn't have Zuckerberg in this ecosystem, people would look at tech a completely different way, I believe. And they could solve the entire problem with one simple product innovation. If you logged into Facebook today and it said, would you like to subscribe to Facebook for $8 a month, $60 a year? Then they would have the air cover. They could just say, you know what, Dick and Jason, Scott, you all decided that you don't want to give us your data. You're a subscriber. We collect none of your data.
Do you think
then that would solve the whole problem.
Do you think Facebook is truly on top of the issue of data privacy at this point?
They're a disaster. I mean, the whole concept was to move fast and break things. Congratulations. You broke the democracy. You broke people's privacy. That was their explicit goal. And that's why I think if you look at a lot of the problems we have here in Silicon Valley with the black eye, with people looking and not trusting us anymore, it really goes back to Zuckerberg's approach, which was put a product out there, let the chips fall where they may. And that really is very hard to compete against. If Twitter decides, let's be judicious here, let's check the ads before they go up on Twitter. And Zuckerberg's like, check the ads. No, that's friction. Just put the ads up. I don't care if it's in rubles. I don't care if it says Hillary's a racist. Just put that stuff up. That's what they did.
Well, look,
it's hard to say anything after Jason that doesn't sound equivocal, or meek. But Ben Thompson, sort of a thought leader, if you will, out here, wrote a little while back that the way to think about going after or regulating these companies should be different in each case, not blanket same way across the board, broad brush. And his thought on Facebook is, they probably shouldn't be able to be allowed to buy other social networks like Instagram, for example. I think that's probably at least an interesting idea, his way of thinking about you have to treat these companies differently when you think about regulating them.
I would just add that, to Jason's point, if you look at the reaction to Libra, which is Facebook's kind of toe in the water in the cryptocurrency blockchain area, it's been fairly negative in Washington, D.C. and sort of a...
Fairly?
Yeah, well, okay, very.
What could go wrong?
I mean,
right, we're going to create our own currency.
Congress people,
but I think that's an indication that the government realizes they probably waited too long on some of these other fronts. And so the reaction to Libra has been pretty negative.
Hey, Twitter's not out a shining beacon on the hill in some respects as well. I mean, people describe it as a cesspool at certain points for the discourse that it puts forth as well. There are, issues that exist with that service, too. How would you handle that today if you were still running it?
I think that these CEOs and leaders of these companies, and, and I know Jack and the team there think about this stuff all the time, have to do something that's probably, to date, been, would make them cringe, and that's you have to start treating all these accounts differently, meaning that you've got high authority accounts like, I don't know, newspaper accounts, New York Times, New York Post, pick your publication, that that may be allowed to tweet things that a user who just signed up yesterday and has 0 followers shouldn't. So, for example, I'll give you a quick example. Back when I was CEO, ISIS notably assassinated some hostages they had captured. They tweeted photos of the assassination, and we said, okay, any account that tweets these photos out, it was mostly ISIS accounts at the time, we'll suspend them. You can't tweet photos of people being executed. The next day, or not the next day, a couple hours later, I think it was the New York Post, tweets out what is the cover of that evening's New York Post, and it's the photos of these guys being executed. So now you're like, okay, well, now what do we do? Do we have... I just think that these companies can't treat all accounts equally and consistently, and have to start thinking of different tiers of accounts, and accounts that have just signed up and have no followers and no avatar and haven't sent their phone number in, maybe shouldn't be allowed to reply in real time to leaders of the world and high authority accounts on the platform, et cetera, or at least have those things only be seen by their followers and not everybody. That's, if you tell the CEOs of these companies this thing, like, oh, great, I have a hard enough time now, I got to start thinking about treating these accounts differently. But I think that's probably the way forward, as hard as that is.
Last and quick.
Yeah, no, I would just say, I think if you look at Twitter, it started as a free speech experiment, and we were all very pro that. But when you hit scale, things change, obviously, and I think that's a really illustrative example with the assassinations or the murders. Why not just make everybody verified and just say you have to have a real name like Facebook does? And if you don't choose your real name, if you don't verify, then you're going to be part of this underbelly that people have to opt in to see. Now, the reason they wouldn't do that is they're a public company, and then they're going to go flat for 3 quarters, and then y'all are going to give them a hard time, and their stock's going to collapse. And that is really the problem and this reason why companies are staying private longer and why we have this issue that we've been talking about for months about these companies waiting too long to go public. They're waiting because they can't take dramatic action like this without the stock getting cratered and then all the employees are underwater.
I think it's as most things are, and people don't like to hear this, but it's more complicated than just, verifying all the accounts. You've got people who are under political pressure in lots of countries outside the United States where you're not allowed to speak freely, like Tunisia, where the Arab Spring really started and swept across North Africa. Those people were all tweeting under assumed names, and that's how they were able to organize and protest without the government knowing, like, that's, this guy who lives at this address, let's go tie him up before the protest. So it's more complicated than that. There are also people who can't verify their accounts because they don't have their permanent phone numbers, etc. No, I don't think you can ban the President of the United States.
Even if he's abusing people?
It's not Twitter's problem that he was elected president. He's a president of the United States. He has a platform to be able to say what he wants to say, whether irrespective of
no matter what it is.
I just think you can't. It's not Twitter's
any elected official, for that matter.
Yeah, I just don't think you can ban the president of the United States from the platform.
Wait, so if an elected official is a racist and starts publishing,
official is the sheriff of Washtenaw County in Michigan, that's a different thing than the president of the United States of America.
Got it.
Again, I just don't think you can. It goes back to my point. I don't think you can have a terms of service that says we treat every account equally. It causes these companies to have to jump through hoops and twist themselves into a pretzel, and you see that with the way people think about, well, this Trump's tweet XYZ didn't really break this rule for this reason. I just think you should say, look, we're not going to do anything to the President of the United States account. He's the President of the United States.
All right. We'll get final thoughts from you after a quick break. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Jeff Richards, GGV. Jason Calacanis.
Good to be here.
Calacanis Incorporated. All right, we'll be right back.